She came home at 3:17 in the morning after a one-night stand. And the moment she flipped on the living room light, the glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Because sitting calmly on her couch was a woman she had never seen before. A woman holding a photo album. A photo album filled with pictures of her husband. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound in the apartment was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ringing in her ears. Then, the stranger closed the album, looked directly at her, and said something that made the blood drain from her face. "You must be Claire. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 37 years old, and until that night, I thought I was the victim in my marriage. I thought my husband was the problem. I thought I was the one who had finally decided to stop suffering. What I didn't know was that I had walked into a trap that had been waiting for me for nearly 2 years, and the person who built it wasn't my husband. It was me." Have you ever made a decision that felt justified in the moment, only to realize later it changed everything? Let me know in the comments. The story started 11 months earlier. My husband Ethan and I had been married for 12 years. From the outside, our life looked stable. Nice condo, good jobs, no children, but plenty of plans. The kind of marriage people described as solid. The problem was that solid and happy are not the same thing. Somewhere along the way, we stopped talking. Then we stopped laughing. Then we stopped noticing each other entirely. Ethan worked in corporate compliance. I managed marketing campaigns for a software company. We became roommates, sharing expenses. Nothing dramatic happened. No screaming, no broken dishes, no explosive betrayal. Just distance. The slow kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that convinces you nothing is wrong until one day you realize you no longer recognize the person sitting across from you at dinner. I started staying late at work. At first because I was busy. Then because I preferred it. Eventually because going home felt exhausting. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. But instead of confronting me, he withdrew further. Looking back, I realized we were both waiting for the other person to fix something neither of us was willing to discuss. Then I met Ryan. Ryan worked for a client company. He was charming, funny, attentive. The kind of man who looked directly at you when you spoke. The kind of man who remembered small details. What started as harmless conversations turned into lunches. Then drinks. Then text messages. Nothing physical happened for months, which made it easier to justify. I told myself it wasn't cheating. I told myself Ethan had emotionally abandoned me first. I told myself I deserved to feel appreciated. The lies people tell themselves are rarely creative. They're usually just convenient. 3 weeks before everything collapsed, Ethan surprised me. He suggested marriage counseling. I remember staring at him across the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely vulnerable. "I don't want to lose you," he said. Simple words. Honest words. Words I should have listened to. Instead, I interpreted them as desperation. And desperation felt unattractive. I said I'd think about it. I never did. A week later, Ryan kissed me, and I kissed him back. The guilt lasted approximately 12 minutes. Then, I buried it. Human beings are remarkably talented at ignoring reality when reality becomes inconvenient. The night of the one-night stand happened after a company conference downtown. Ryan booked a hotel room. I knew exactly what I was doing. There was no confusion, no accident, no misunderstanding. I made a choice, and at 2:40 a.m., I left the hotel. I remember feeling strangely empty during the drive home. Not guilty, not excited, just hollow. Like I'd expected something important to happen and instead received a receipt. The streets were nearly deserted. The city lights reflected off the windshield. My phone buzzed twice. Ryan. Then Ryan again. I ignored both messages. By the time I reached the condo, all I wanted was sleep. I unlocked the door. Stepped inside. The apartment was dark. Silent. I assumed Ethan was asleep. Then I reached for the light switch. The room exploded with brightness. And there she was, sitting on my couch, perfectly calm, perfectly composed, holding that photo album. The stranger looked to be around 50. Elegant. Expensive coat. Silver earrings. No sign of panic whatsoever, which was terrifying, because normal people don't break into someone's home and wait in the dark. "Who are you?" I whispered. She tilted her head. "You're Claire." It wasn't a question. "How did you get in here?" She ignored that. Instead, she opened the album again. I saw photos of Ethan as a child, Ethan in high school, Ethan graduating college, photos I'd never seen before. Then she looked at me and smiled sadly. I'm Margaret. She paused. Ethan's mother. My stomach dropped. I had met Ethan's mother exactly once, at our wedding. She lived overseas. We rarely spoke, but I recognized her instantly now. What are you doing here? Margaret studied me for several seconds. Then her eyes moved to my clothes, my makeup, my expression. And somehow she knew. Not guessed, knew. You were with someone else tonight. The words hit like a hammer. I said nothing, because denying it suddenly felt ridiculous. Margaret slowly closed the album. You know, she said quietly, I spent years wondering whether you deserved my son. My pulse started racing. What is this? This, she replied, is the answer. I expected anger. Instead, what came next was worse. Disappointment. Pure disappointment. Pure disappointment. She reached into her purse and placed a thick envelope on the coffee table. Then another. Then another. 3 envelopes. Neatly organized. Carefully labeled. What is that? Evidence. I stared. She folded her hands. For 18 months, Ethan suspected you were having an affair. The room tilted. What? He didn't want to believe it. My mouth went dry. He hired a private investigator 6 months ago. I felt cold. Suddenly, impossibly cold. Margaret continued. Not because he wanted revenge, because he wanted certainty. She nodded toward the envelopes. Photos. Messages. Dates. Reports. I couldn't breathe. The investigator had documented everything. Lunches, meetings, hotel visits, phone records. Every rationalization I constructed suddenly collapsed. Ethan hadn't been blind, he'd known, or at least suspected. For months. Where's Ethan? Margaret's expression changed. For the first time, genuine sadness appeared. He's gone. My heart stopped. What do you mean gone? He moved out. I stared at her. No. He left 6 hours ago. I laughed. Actually laughed, because it sounded absurd, impossible. Then I noticed something. The bookshelf looked different. The hallway looked different. The framed photograph near the kitchen was gone. The apartment wasn't exactly the same. It was emptier, subtly, but undeniably. Ethan had taken his things. Why are you here? Margaret looked around the apartment. He asked me to be. I sat down because my legs suddenly felt unreliable. Why? Because he knew you'd come home eventually. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Eventually. Not after work. Not after dinner. Eventually. Because Ethan had expected this exact night. This exact outcome. Margaret leaned forward. He spent 12 years loving you, Claire. I stared at the floor. He fought for this marriage alone for almost 3. Every word felt heavier than the last. Counseling. Pause. Date nights. Pause. Date nights. Pause. Conversations. Pause. You stop showing up. The silence afterward was brutal, because nothing she said was wrong. I wanted to defend myself, explain, justify. But every explanation sounded pathetic before I even spoke it. Then Margaret said something unexpected. He still wanted to forgive you. I looked up. What? He told me if you came home and admitted everything, he would try. My chest tightened. What? He packed his things yesterday. I could barely hear her. He said he would wait one final day. The room felt smaller. Just one. Margaret looked at the clock on the wall. Then back at me. He waited until midnight. I felt tears forming. Real tears. The ugly kind. Not because I got caught. Because suddenly I understood what I'd lost. Not the marriage. The man. The man who had stayed. The man who had stayed. The man who had tried. The man who had waited. And I had even shown up. I was in a hotel room with someone who barely knew my middle name. At 4 a.m., Margaret left. Before leaving, she handed me one final envelope. This is from Ethan. Then she walked out. No yelling, no threats, no drama, just quiet finality. I sat alone in the apartment until sunrise. Eventually, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Only 2 pages. I still remember every word. Not because it was cruel. Because it wasn't. Ethan didn't insult me. Didn't attack me. Didn't blame me. Instead, he wrote about memories, road trips, inside jokes, the first apartment we rented, the cheap couch we'd assembled incorrectly, the life we'd built. Then near the end he wrote one sentence that shattered me. I kept waiting for the woman I married to come back. Eventually I realized she wasn't lost. She had simply chosen another direction. I read that sentence 50 times. Maybe more. Because it contained a truth I couldn't escape. I hadn't accidentally drifted away. I had made choices. Thousands of small choices. And eventually those choices became a person Ethan no longer recognized. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. It was surprisingly civilized. No screaming, no courtroom battles, no dramatic confrontations, just signatures, documents, endings. Ryan disappeared within weeks. Which wasn't surprising. People who help you destroy one relationship rarely become the foundation of a healthy new one. As for Ethan, I heard he eventually remarried. A teacher. Kind. Funny. Apparently they have a daughter now. I'm genuinely happy for him. That sentence would have been impossible for me to say a few years ago. But time changes things, including perspective. Today, when people hear this story, they assume the shocking moment was finding Ethan's mother sitting on my couch in the dark. They're wrong. That wasn't the shocking moment. The shocking moment was realizing that nobody had stolen my marriage from me. Not Ryan. Not Ethan's mother. Not bad luck. Not circumstance. Me. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't that someone betrayed you. It's discovering that you became the person doing the betraying. That night changed my life. Not because I lost my husband. Because I finally lost the ability to lie to myself. And strange as it sounds, that ended up being the beginning of everything that came after. Because once the excuses disappeared, all that remained was the truth. And the truth, however painful, is usually where real change begins.